Well, as we speak, the fourth round of co-commander level talks between India and China are now on. They've in fact been on since about 11 in the morning. Now we know the previous few times the talks have lasted for more than 12 hours or for around 12 hours. So this seems like a long haul as well. But is this the toughest round yet, is what we're going to try and find out in this episode of Government Matters, given the focus is going to be the Pangong Lake area. Snehesh Alex Philip, who tracks defense for ThePrint, is with me to start sending your questions right away. Snehesh, so let's first talk about what the focus of today's talks is.
Well, the big focus of today's talk would be, of course, on the Depsang plains as well as on the Pangong Lake, as was reported by ThePrint last week itself. Besides that, the two sides will also review the disengagement that has already taken place
in the other areas.
PP14 in Galwan, the PP15, PP17 and PP17A in the hot spring area. So if you ask, the question for this is whether it is the toughest round yet. Of course, it is the toughest round yet. Because if you remember, this is something that we've been reporting and we've been saying right from the very beginning that the main point of difference lies in Pangong.
Right.
Now, there has been transgressions in Galwan as well as in hot spring area, but here it was more or less, both sides at the local level knew where the LAC was. Now, Chinese, of course, have laid claim to the entire Galwan Valley. That's a separate thing altogether. But as far as transgressions were concerned, it was, as far as the local commanders were concerned, it was a transgression that had taken place and which they were expecting the Chinese to go back eventually, and they have done so.
Right.
But however, in Pangong and in Depsang is where there is, both sides differ completely on where the LAC lies.
Right.
For example, as per India, the LAC is at Finger 8. Now, Finger 8, remember that the main Indian base is at Finger 2.
Right.
And Finger 8, and beyond Finger 8 is where the Chinese are, the Srijap post. Now, the Chinese have come in from Finger 8 till Finger 4, which is roughly about 8 kilometers.
Right.
Now, there's also a confusion about where the Chinese claim line is. Chinese, and many people say that Chinese claim line is Finger 4. But remember that is not the Chinese claim line. That is the area. That is the area till where the Chinese used to patrol by road.
Right.
Because the Chinese had built a road from their Srijap post down till Finger 5 in 1999. When the Kargil battle was fought. Now the Chinese, for patrolling, they come in their vehicles. So the vehicles can reach only up to Finger 4. Beyond Finger 4, that is Finger 3, the stretch is a very narrow little stretch. It's about a 1 kilometer stretch that the Indians, use to patrol till Finger 8,
right,
which they do it by foot.
Right.
However, if you go back to the thing, there's a video, an interview that I did with Colonel Dinny, who served in this area in between 2015 and 2017, and he says, and he has clarified that is still where the Chinese patrol. However, the other areas, there used to be boat patrolling by the Chinese as well as by Indians.
Right.
So the Chinese claim line are always differed from Finger 3. At times they say Finger 3, at times they say Finger 2.
Right. So of course it's going to be a tough one today. But Snehesh, you also said there will be a review of where the disengagement process has reached as far as the earlier parts are concerned. So what is the status as of now?
Well, as of now, as far as Galwan Valley is concerned, the Chinese are well within the Chinese territory. Of course, they are at forward deployed. Rather than, for example, in times, as many of the viewers
right,
would be aware, that in times of, during peace times, the army is deployed at a particular location, which is considered to be a peaceful location, which is away from the border. However, during times of crisis or in terms of when you carry out operational maneuvers, the army moves forward.
So that's why it's a disengagement, not a de-escalation process.
Yes, so there's a disengagement which is happening. So now, the Chinese were inside the Indian territory in Galwan. They had reached up to the Y junction. From there, the Chinese have gone back, and now they are in their territory, in their side of the line of actual control. Now, as far as the situation at PP15 and PP17 are concerned, what the army has been saying, and when I say army, I mean to say army sources.
Right.
And government sources have been saying that the disengagement process was initiated last Monday at PP15 and PP17, and the disengagement process there has been completed.
Right.
So the army sources, the government sources underline that there are no Chinese soldiers as far as the Indian side of the LAC is concerned in these areas.
Right.
Now, of course, they are in Pangong.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start taking some viewer questions. This is from Kostab Sarkar. Is the focus of the Chinese government shifting towards the South China Sea, given the US pressure there? Why are they cooperating with India so early on in the summer? They could have waited for another 4 months before disengaging in Ladakh. So now we're suspicious of the cooperation.
Well, as far as, and again I say, we've been, right from the very beginning, we've been mentioning that the disengagement process will happen. It's going to be a long-term process. So while you've seen the de-escalation taking place, the disengagement taking place, remember that it's not done completely. So for the entire process to end, it would mean that restoration of status quo ante as of April. So this particular process is going to take a very long time, and this could very well
stretch
into the winters and beyond. Now, while there has been disengagement in Galwan and the hot spring Gogra area, the disengagement process at Pangong is going to be a tough one. Now, this is primarily because remember that in Galwan and in the hot spring area, both sides have withdrawn from the area of face-off. So, for example, when the Chinese in Galwan, the Chinese came into and reached the Y junction,
right,
and Indians were opposite that. So, when the disengagement took place, the Chinese were supposed to, as per the understanding, the Chinese were supposed to move back by about 2 kilometers, 1.5 to 2 kilometers in this
right.
particular area, which would have put them inside their territory. However, they have moved much beyond. Similarly, the Indians have also gone back.
Right.
Now, the distance for the Indians is not same as the Chinese. The Indians have gone back a little behind. If the Chinese have moved back by about 2 kilometers, the Indians, I presume, would have moved back by about 700 to 1,000 meters. So, but that is because they were already in the territory.
Right.
So, there's an area that is now between the Chinese side and the Indian side, which has been loosely termed as a buffer zone.
Right.
But there's an area to ensure that there is, there is no face-off. The troops don't come face to face again, and there's not a repeat of what happened on 15th of June.
Right.
In Pangong, the same formula will not work, because in Pangong, the Chinese have come really deep into the Indian territory. For example, 8 kilometers inside.
Right.
Now, for the Chinese to move back, so the Indians are there, they have administrative post at about finger 3, and the main base at finger 4. The Chinese have moved till finger 4. So the Indian main post is finger 2, and the Chinese have moved till finger 4. If the same policy of going back equal distance cannot happen at Pangong, because
right.
the Indians are very well
within the territory,
within the controlled territory.
Right.
Territory. Yeah.
Right. There's a question from Mihir Mehta. Why are Indian troops also withdrawing when only the Chinese should be really pulling back? What is the exact status at the hot springs? Are they still in our territory?
Well, I've answered these questions before. As far as hot spring is concerned, what the sources are saying is that, and there are satellite imagery to that extent, which and that is what we've reported also, that there are no Chinese soldiers on the inside the Indian side of the LAC.
Right.
This was, when I was told, I think this was Thursday when we had reported this, and my information is as of Thursday. As far as why the Indians are also moving back from a location, well, ideally, this is a disengagement process where the two sides have gone back from the area of face-off. The Chinese had come in, so they've gone back further. The Chinese are not on the Indian side of the LAC. Yes, the Indians have also gone back. Now, this is part of a disengagement process, and that is why I said this whole, for the restoration of the status quo ante, is going to take time.
It's a longer process.
So it's a long process. So while disengagement will happen in phase-wise manners, and what I mean by restoration of status quo ante is Chinese well within their territory and India continuing to do the normal patrolling that it does.
Right.
So right now the patrols are suspended, primarily because the Chinese, during the discussions with India during the military talks, have claimed that the Chinese were anyways withdrawing from in Galwan, but the clash on June 15 delayed the whole process. Now, remember that this clash is something that both India and China had not calculated in their scheme of things. That's something
Right.
that both sides were equally
Taken aback
by this clash. So they don't want a repeat of any sort of clash. So they have mentioned that there will be no patrolling. However, there would be joint monitoring of the disengagement that is taking place.
Right. Saurabh Vyas, is there any chance that these talks result in a clear demarcation of a border or even an established LAC? Simply put, do they ever initiate talks with any long-term objective? So is the objective only the current disengagement process, or is there a longer-term objective in place?
Remember that right now the talks are happening between at the diplomatic as well as at the military level. Now these talks are not focused at border, defining of borders. These talks are focused on disengagement, de-escalation.
Right.
The border talks are something that is held at a higher level, at the level of the NSA, the National Security Advisor, along with his Chinese counterpart, who is the Chinese foreign minister. Now that is part of a separate kind of talk. So don't confuse the border talks with what is happening, in Trishul today.
Right. Shaurya Agnihotri, what role did PM Modi's visit to Ladakh have in this de-escalation?
Well, that's a very tough question to answer. What role PM Modi had?
The BJP would have us believe that it was
but I can tell you for the fact that while formal disengagement happened began on Monday, the thinning down had already started even before Prime Minister's visit. And that is what the sources have said.
Right.
Now, so yes, the Prime Minister's visit was an important visit that sent a message to
it was more
the
of a
soldiers.
messaging.
It was a messaging that was meant for the soldiers, for the country as a whole, and also to China.
Right. Manoj N, will we see an expansion to buffer zones at the friction points, which could potentially result to a new LAC definition? If so, how do we answer this question of who lost their land, if at all?
Well, as far as buffer zones is concerned, as I mentioned earlier also, there is a loosely described word, the buffer zone at the LAC. What the army, my sources in the army continue to maintain, and we've done a story explaining this also, that this is not really a buffer zone per se, but this is right now can loosely be described as as a buffer zone. But remember that this does not mean that the LAC has shifted. Now, as far as there's an argument that is on whether the pullback should have happened from this location or it should have happened from the LAC itself. Remember that the Chinese had come inside the Indian side of the LAC. So the pullback of the Chinese has to happen from where they were standing. So which means that would be counted as in Galwan Valley, the pullback would take place from the Y junction. But however, that does not mean that the Y junction is the new LAC as far as India is concerned.
Right.
So as far as India is concerned, PP14 is the last patrolling point, is the patrolling point for them. The LAC is about, some say that the LAC is right where the PP14 is. I am told the LAC is about 400 to 500 meters away ahead from PP14. So that continues to, that remains the LAC. There is no change of LAC as far as India is concerned. Same in Pangong too. For India, the LAC is at finger 8. It is not at finger 7. It will neither be at finger 4, 5, 6 or anything.
Right. Angel Sat, has the status quo been restored? You've already answered that question. Aditya Dang, what do you speculate in the coming days?
What do I speculate? Unfortunately,
do you want to
get
into the speculation game?
Unfortunately, I can't speculate, and neither do I speculate.
Right. There is a question from Abhishek Mangudkar. Is there any new construction or measures being taken by the Indian military to keep a close watch on the LAC?
Well, if you're asking whether there's the friction points, well, as I said, there is continuous monitoring that is being done. The monitoring is through the physical monitoring, in the sense what you can clear, because the troops were in face off with each other, they can see each other. There are also drones and UAVs that have been deployed in this particular area. There's of course satellite. The images that you see on Twitter and all are the commercial satellite images, but however there are military grade military satellites which gives pictures that India has, as well as is procured from friendly countries. So as far as the Chinese movement in these areas is concerned, I can tell you and be rest assured that the movement is being closely monitored. All developments are being closely monitored by the concerned agencies.
Right. Anand Mishra, is there any chance that the Chinese will never vacate the finger area?
Well, that is, one can't really say whether, what is going in Chinese mind. And I think, I've spoken to a number of people in the security and defense establishment. However, none have been able to confidently say why, the reason why China is doing this. There are multiple reasons that everybody talks about. I can also come out with my own reasoning. However, no one has really been able to pinpoint why Chinese have done it. So it's difficult to read Chinese mind. It is sad. It is a dangerous thing that we are unable to read the Chinese mind. But as I said, since we are not able to read, and one never really knows what happens in what is going on in China's mind. However, and that is why I said that this is going to be a long drawn process. It's not going to be simple. It's not as if Ruhi has come in and is sitting on my chair and asked her to get up and she goes there.
Right. Snehesh, I know you said no speculation, but there's a question from Akhil Kumar Sankla. Can we rule out the possibility of Chinese attack in the winters?
Well, as I said, this is completely speculative, and one really doesn't know what China is up to, what China is thinking. For example, it's difficult to, you can only believe what the other person is saying. It's very difficult to even imagine what the other person is thinking. At the same time, there are enough, the Indians have, I would not say enough, the Indians have pumped in a large number of men, material. There are, there are fighters, there are gunship helicopters, there are tanks, there are extra artillery that has been brought into Ladakh. There is over 3 div strong additional presence of soldiers in Ladakh. So a lot of steps have been taken. It is much more than the mirror deployment that happened in June. So there is a large number of troops and equipment that have been pumped into Ladakh. So again, I would say I would refrain from speculation about what would happen. I think at the end of the day, we all hoping that this crisis doesn't escalate and this crisis would end.
Right. One last question, Snehesh. This is from Mehul. Isn't it well established that the clash at Galwan was premeditated? Why are you then saying that the Chinese were surprised?
Well,
this is in reference to you saying earlier both India and China were taken aback.
Well, the official stand has been that it is a premeditated attack, and premeditated attack can happen at various levels. So what I am saying is that when the Chinese moved in and the standoff was happening, neither China nor India had at that time thought that a clash like that happened on June would take place on June 15th. So remember that, while yes, of course, Indians lost 20 of his soldiers, including the commanding officer of 16 Bihar. However, the fact is that the Chinese have also suffered losses. Now, this is a huge setback to the Chinese army. Now, the Chinese army hasn't seen death, the Chinese military hasn't seen death in a very long while. They have always gotten about getting their things done in the recent years through bullying, through the show of force. However, this time in Ladakh, of course, they were, they continue to bully and they're showing off their strength. But the fact is that a clash did take place.
Right.
Yes, 20 Indian soldiers did, die in action. However, the fact is that the Chinese have also suffered casualties, and such has been the setback to the Chinese that they have even refused to come out with a figure of how many casualties were there.
Right. So, Snehesh, any indication as to when this meeting is likely to finish?
Well,
we know the last one lasted for 12 hours.
The one before that 12 hours. Before that, it lasted for about 11 hours. Generally, these meetings which start during the day, they of course have several other meetings that take place, and in this case also, it's likely to end late in the night.
Right. Well, we know the news cycle at this point is completely dominated by Sachin Pilot and what's happening in Rajasthan, but there's a very important meeting happening at the Chushul Moldo meeting point, which is of the core commanders of India and China. So thank you so much for giving us perspective on that and letting us know what really we can expect from it. Thank you for sending in your questions, for watching Government Matters. Don't forget to keep tracking our YouTube channel.